And the film is Bamako by Abdurrahman Sissako, produced by Danny Glover. And perhaps the good way to start the conversation is to ask two questions. One on the production of the film, I put that to Danny, and then one on the reception of the film. That will be Angela's question. So, Danny, can you tell us why did you produce this film? How did he produce this film? What were your reasons? Yeah, tell us about your work.
I first met at the film festival in Amia. We won the jury together, and I had seen his film "Waiting for Happiness," beautiful film about migration. And I asked him what was his next project, and I wanted to do. We were just I would want to do something, work with him in any way, and um, he said he told me that he grew up in a courtyard. His mother is Mauritanian. His father is Somalian, and grew up in a courtyard. And he said when he grew up, there were 25 people in his father's courtyard living there. And he said today there are 25 people living there. And students who are going to school, people who've been displaced, migrants, unemployed, and all the various parts of that community. And he wanted to, in that courtyard, he wanted to put the World Bank and IMF on trial. And I think the original title was called The Court. And we began working on it and raising money. And Jocelyn Barnes, I can't say enough about Jocelyn Barnes, who really was extraordinary in finding the resources, etc., for the film. You know, and we got money from here. We invested as a company in the film itself, money in the film, and it's from the outset. We used I think a strategy that was very important in introducing this film and finding this audience. We had symposiums. We screened it. And interesting enough, people who do the work, you know, in countries that have to do with development, wherever they come from, they know the story. So they know the real story, and we would have screenings of this, and people would see the film, and it was their story as well. It was a story that they tried to tell, you know, through all the hyperbole and all the propaganda around structural adjustments about what Africa was and everything else, and that was it. On the first weekend here in New York, that first weekend, it was the second highest grossing film that weekend. And we had built through various, in Paris, I remember we had a screening of it. There was a screening of it in a Durham. It was a panel discussion, and we had like 400,000 hits on that. So and you know, there's no English in it, you know. So basically, I think from that vantage point, we saw this as an opportunity to really talk about the issue. You can talk about the debt, and there's been a great deal of conversation about the debt, you know, from Bono to others who mentioned the debt and forgiveness of the debt and all that. But we don't understand the other aspect to that, the dynamics about that. And when we begin to realize that the testing ground for all these particular projects and programs happens in the developed world of the global South, whether it's the debt itself, or the structural adjustments in itself, the privatization that happens, also the other aspects of that in terms of money fluctuation, currency fluctuations, all those happen. The outrageous amount that that countries in the global south had to pay for spare parts, all the particular things that happened with relation to that. And if you look at, one of the things that you realize that there's another way, whether we talk about AGOA, the African Growth and Development project that everybody supported in this country. There's other ways you talk about development, and that development could be regional. If Uganda grows organic cotton, South Africa has the capacity to take that cotton, create manufactured goods out of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You have something, a development that finds its way that impacts all the particular regions and is internalized in a different kind of way. Not just a development that's certainly based upon exploiting labor, cheap labor, as it is, exploiting cheap labor, and from moving from one place to the other. But this is Detroit's story as well. Structural adjustments hit Detroit and their major, place.
Angela, thank you for coming as our artist in residence. One of the things that we do is to ask scholar in residence, we ask the scholar, what would you like to do? And in this case, Angela wanted to be with Danny and discuss this film. So we've heard from the producer. What touched you in this film?
So first of all, Mancha, let me thank you and the Institute of African American Affairs and Jaira for having invited me to spend an entire week in New York. And I should say, I have known Danny, we've known each other since 1970 something, early 70s. We've known each other for a long time. And shortly after this film was completed, you sent me a copy. And I watched it and I said, this has to be the best film I have ever seen. And each time I see it, I see much more in it than I had seen the previous viewing. So that when you asked me what I might want to do, I thought about the film. And of course, it was an excuse to spend some time with Danny again, because we usually see each other on the run, on the plane. Or yeah, we happened to be on a plane once flying from Oakland to Denver, and at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I think we kept everybody awake because we did nothing but talk. But let me say that I think it's especially important for people in this country to see this film. We have been denied a vocabulary that allows us to talk about the impact of these economic changes, global capitalism, privatization. And this film, I think, shows us those connections, the connections between the institutional and the personal. In that sense, I could call it a feminist film. And for someone who's been working around prison issues the vast majority of my life, this film is important because, as you said, it's the story of Detroit, but it's also the story of why the institution of the prison has arisen not only in this country, but all over the world as a kind of garbage bin to capture the human detritus that is created by privatization and the globalization of capital. And there are just so many moving moments in that film. I love the way he allows the camera to linger on the faces. I like the silences in the film. And it's it's just it's a stunning piece of cinematography, and it does the work of allowing us to understand those connections between the political and the intimate.
Simply by the juxtaposition of images itself, you know, all those images that you find in the film, you know, and as Angela said, the silence, the camera lingering, you know, and through silence, you know, often film don't allow us to draw our own conclusions and interpretations from just the visual language to say the visual language is so powerful in the film.
You know, watching the film tonight, I was thinking about cinema and representation. What is political cinema? You know, if you think about Costa Gabra's Z, for example, or if you think about almost any of Samben's films, and the ways in which these directors, in order to, I mean, Godard does the same thing, but let's stay with Samben, because Samben comes at a time when Africa did not have a self-image, you know, to represent itself. And then after Samben, we moved to a cinema where there were requirements of being beautiful. You know, Abdraman himself was part of that. He made La Vie sur Terre, he made Waiting for Happiness, stunningly beautiful films. And then he comes with this film where he almost, I mean, you know, it's like Fela says, let's arrest the music. He arrests cinema in a way. He arrests cinema where he just leaves the camera. And the camera just is on these people and no cut, nothing. Just let's leave the camera there. It's part of cinema verite. It's part of direct cinema. But it's also a cinema that has a crisis in representation. How do we represent this World Bank situation in Africa today? What is the best language to represent this? And I think he succeeded in doing that by just leaving the camera on these people. And
yeah, I think for me the most important scene of the film is with the peasant Zegwe Bamba, and you hear his lament, and we don't know what he's saying. And apparently the language is a language that probably was not understood by the people attending the trial, most of them. But at the same time, we did understand.
You know, because I mean it's a poetic language in a way. I mean, if one were to say what is he saying, the lawyer in a way said it, but in many ways it's the old hunter's lament or song, and it's a song that's what has happened to humanity today. What is Maya? You know, he repeats Maya all the time. But really, I think
and there was that scene in Mandabi by Ousmane Samben, when he says, "What has come of this world?"
That's right. It's
at the
really
end, because,
and it happens in Yelen too, when they are in circle. You see the same guy. But I want to go back to what you said, because I really think that we don't need to understand it, and yet we understand it. You know, because it's a poetic language, and maybe African cinema, maybe poetry is our way of countering the World Bank rational language that's killing us. Maybe you need poetry. You need to bring poetry to do that. But a question to Angela: the film tried to make corruption something like an excuse, an alibi. Africans are corrupt, therefore they cannot develop. In this country, I was thinking about that. Perhaps because of your presence, it made me think faster. But also the whole idea about black criminality. The drugs, crack cocaine and so on, in order to fill the prisons up with black people. And in Africa, these Africans are corrupt in order to do to them. I mean, reading Angela Davis, what do we do?
Well, first of all, we didn't see the Western scene. And Danny has a cameo in it. There's a film that is being shown in the courtyard, and it's an African Western, I guess, in the style of the Italian Westerns. Right. And so I think that also has to do with the representation of critical representation of Black criminality and Black corruption. Well, I think we have to talk about criminalization as opposed to criminality, because it's a process. And if we think about how criminalization of Blackness evolved in this part of the world, of course there's slavery, but perhaps even more important than the institution of slavery was the neo-slavery that followed the convict lease system, during which Blackness was criminalized to such an extent that huge corporations like U.S. Steel, all they had to do was to say, "Oh, we need more labor," and the sheriffs would conduct roundups, arresting people for virtually anything, and those people then would become subject to forced servitude. And as a matter of fact, Douglas Blackman's book, Slavery by Another Name, is a really good investigation of how this criminalization of Blackness evolved. I mean, we're still dealing with this today when you consider how many people are in prison in this country on, for example, drug charges. I mean, we know that just as many or more proportionally white people do drugs and sell drugs, but if you look at who's behind bars, it's Blacks and Latinos because of the hyper surveillance and the criminalization of Blackness. But with respect to Africa, if one looks at South Africa and what has happened in the aftermath of the dismantling of apartheid, and that I don't want to underestimate how important that was. We know. But when one looks today at the extent to which they rely on the institution of the prison and how privatization as represented in the film has given rise to this new need for prison institutions, which in turn then means that companies like Corrections Corporation of America get to build their private prisons in South Africa. G4S, which is the third largest corporation in the world, third only to Walmart and Foxconn. It's a international security corporation. They are the largest employer on the entire continent of Africa, with prisons in South Africa and prisons in Israel to hold Palestinian prisoners. You know, they're responsible also, oh, don't let me continue, but let me just say one other thing. They're responsible also for the transportation of immigrants, to the deportation of immigrants from across the US border into Mexico, as they have been responsible for the deportation of African immigrants. And a young man by the name of Jimmy Mabunga was a couple of years ago actually killed by G4S security guards on a British Airlines flight as they were deporting him to Angola.
You know, I think one of the interesting and most dynamic things that we see is we see movements that happen here, or we see campaigns. We take an identification of the idea of the 1% and the 99%, which resonates from the Occupy movement. You see the nature and the changes within global capitalism as it stands, and the institution, internationalization of that, of global capitalism. That we have a company here right here is on the stock exchange building prisons around the world, in a sense, and that it on the one hand we may think that it's something benign, in the sense the regular people will understand it, don't understand that even in this country, there are whole communities in this country right here, even in the state of New York, which depend solely on having a private prison there. Their whole income and is derived from having a private a prison, and towns are built around that. I've been visiting. I've been visiting Geraldo Hernandez, one of the Cuban Five, at in the prison, the federal penitentiary. In the valley, right in the valley, outside of, I can't think of the name of the penitentiary right now, but around that prison, our this whole community has evolved around that prison itself, providing jobs, providing a certain other aspects that suggest that it's a community that has benefited from the prison system itself. I think on the one hand, one of the things we tried to do when we did, and certainly as we think about this film and the kind of, we showed this film to the Venezuelan ambassador to the UN, and that same year that it came out, and he said, "My God, this is our story." So it's not only Africa's story; it's certainly the story of the global South. But one of the things that we tried to do with another film we did with Eugene Directi, "The House I Live In," is to draw the comparison, draw the connection between people who become expendable, who are no longer of use, and what's come. It's very interesting in our own history. Jeremy Rifkin, in his book *The End of Work*, talks about black labor, and he says it was not the Emancipation Proclamation that freed black people from the land; it was the invention of the cotton picking machine. So in 1944, 100% of the cotton is picked by hand. By 1970, 100 is picked by machine, thereby displacing people from the land, pushing it into urban areas, and those jobs that occurred out of that, those income, high income jobs that with very low skills, those jobs began to outsource in Detroit. So you have Detroit, a population of 1.3 million people at one time, is now a population of just under 700,000 people right now. So all these are kind of dynamics that we see implemented here that have often found birth in other places in the world, and a great deal of what we're talking, and interesting enough, because there are other things on the agenda. We talk about this film right here, and there are things that remind us, okay, this happened, this moment, but we have 22 of the 54 African nations who are on the most endangered list for global warming and climate change. You have cities in north of Maputo, 2,000 kilometers north of Maputo in Mozambique, which is not talking about how do we reverse what is happening, but how do we evacuate. So you have that on the other hand, and you have technology, the technology that's around fabric development, nanotechnology, which is going to make cotton, valueless in a sense. And if 23 or 33 countries in Africa grow and import cotton, imagine what that's going to do to the economy. And there we are. And those are kind of issues we don't see and we talk about. And a great deal is interesting because when I was on the plane going to South Africa recently, there was and this is the South African Airways. A lot of the promotion were about individual capitalists. This Nigerian capitalist who's a billionaire and talking about to other Africans about the value of a business, becoming entrepreneurs and everything else. So the motto is that it's always that a few are going to be saved from the collapse, you know.
You see,
And another thing about this, we're talking about another aspect of this, and as we see with the issue of Somalia and other places, the failed state. When we were in Mali shooting the film, and we were in Mali in 1998, we didn't have what we had in Timbuktu in Mali in 1998, you know, and the collapse in the whole idea of state and what happens to that failed state in all aspects of its development or lack of development, and how it becomes useful as a way for a lot of experience that we may be frightened of, whether it's GMOs or whether it's other ways in which we control the idea of suicide. You know, when I thought about the idea, because the last scene, he commits suicide, but you know, Indian farmers are committing suicide. You know, and suicide is a major issue in Africa. Suicide is a major